Fired for showing compassion? That's unthinkable. Grace, a dedicated librarian, gave a homeless teen a free book, losing her job in the process. Yet destiny had other plans. A surprising visitor arrived minutes later, altering Grace's future forever. Today, I'd love to share a new tale. Hi everyone, welcome to Inspiring Stories. Grace had always believed in the power of books to uplift and transform lives. Ever since she was a child growing up in the tranquil town of Oak Ridge, she had found her closest friends, her biggest adventures, and her wisest teachers within the pages of well-worn novels. By her teenage years, her weekends were spent volunteering at the local library, a modest building on the edge of Main Street. After completing her studies, she was overjoyed to land a position as a librarian there, thrilled by the idea of guiding others in discovering the magic that had so enriched her own life. For several years, she worked under the watchful eye of Mr. Reed, the library director. He was a precise man who believed in adhering strictly to every procedure and saw the library more as a business than a haven for learning. Despite his somewhat severe rules, Grace poured her heart into helping patrons. She would greet them with a cheerful smile, remember the authors they loved, and offer book recommendations based on their moods or life challenges. Over time, she became a cherished figure in Oak Ridge, someone townspeople would speak of with genuine warmth. When children came in after school, trudging in with heavy backpacks, Grace would encourage them to read whatever fired up their imaginations. On rainy afternoons, seniors found solace as she guided them toward gentle classics that made them sigh with fond memories. Oak Ridge was small and seemed largely untouched by big city troubles, but that didn't mean the town was without people who struggled. Homelessness was rare, yet it wasn't unheard of for a person or two to wander through, seeking warmth or a modest meal. That was how Toby entered Grace's life. He was perhaps 16 or 17, although it was difficult to determine his exact age. He had appeared one autumn morning in front of the library doors, hunched under a threadbare hoodie, and looking as though he wanted to slip inside and vanish among the shelves. Grace, setting up a small display of new arrivals, noticed him lingering in the threshold. She approached him, coaxed him in, and offered a few words of welcome. She learned he had been living on the streets for a while, having come to Oak Ridge in search of a relative who, sadly, had moved away years ago. With nowhere else to go, Toby had started drifting through quiet corners of the town, trying to fend for himself. The first time Grace tried to speak to Toby, he barely responded. He was guarded, suspicious of too much kindness, and said he simply wanted to read. Grace respected that. She led him to a cozy reading nook by the back windows, told him how to find different genres, and left him alone with a small pile of fantasy novels she thought might spark his interest. Over the following weeks, Toby appeared more regularly. He gravitated toward adventure stories, full of magic, distant kingdoms, and heroes triumphing against the odds. Grace observed him slowly relax in the library's calm atmosphere, nodding politely to regular patrons. She began to check on him periodically, asking if he needed help finding more books or if he wanted to talk. Eventually, he offered small glimpses of his life. Nights sleeping behind the bus station or under a sturdy oak tree in the park. Dawns spent trying to find something to eat. Days wandering the side streets with nowhere in particular to go. Through these conversations, Grace grew increasingly concerned for Toby's well-being. Whenever she could, she gave him small tokens of support, like spare granola bars or leftover pastries from the staff lounge. Some days, Toby would slip into the library shivering, and she would guide him to the area where the radiator's warmth was strongest, encouraging him to stay as long as he liked. Still, their interactions were mostly quiet, sprinkled with hushed gratitude on Toby's part, and gentle reassurance on Grace's. One day, Oak Ridge had a charity book sale organized by the library. Donated books lined tables, with prices set at $1 or $2. Families came to browse, local volunteers helped with collecting money, and it all felt celebratory. Toby, typically shy, hung back in a corner, obviously eager but with no money to spend. Grace had spotted him eyeing a hardcover fantasy novel, the sequel to one Toby had just finished reading. She could see the longing in his eyes. Yet when he started to inch away, Clearly believing he couldn't afford it, Grace's heart wrenched. Without hesitation, she caught up to him near the door and placed the book in his hands. She insisted that he keep it. No charge. The relief and happiness on Toby's face was enough to fill her own heart with joy. He clutched the book as if it were the only real treasure he had in the world. Later, Grace returned to her duties, happily stacking leftover titles for the library sale's second day, unaware that Mr. Reed had noticed her gesture. When the event concluded, he confronted her. His demeanor, always stiff, now felt downright menacing. He reminded her that all donated books, even if sold cheaply, belonged to the library, and that unauthorized giveaways were not acceptable. Grace tried to explain Toby's situation, but Mr. Reed's expression grew colder. He claimed that if they began distributing free items randomly, everyone would demand the same, and the library's budget would be compromised. Grace found this perspective disheartening, but she kept her composure, hoping there wouldn't be more serious repercussions. Toby sensed the tension and tried to return the book, but Grace gently refused, determined that a small act of kindness shouldn't be forbidden. A few days later, Toby finished that sequel and came to the library bright and early. His cheeks were pink from the morning chill, and he wore the same worn-out clothes he always did, but there was excitement in his eyes. He wanted another book from the same series. Grace searched the shelves and found the next installment. When she saw Toby's disappointment at not having the money to rent or buy a library card, she brushed it aside. She suggested he borrow it informally, telling him to keep it safe and return it in good condition. She believed in trusting him. Toby was so moved that he nearly teared up. All seemed well until the moment Mr. Reed entered the main area, noticed Toby leaving with the novel, and demanded an explanation. Grace offered it freely, thinking her boss would at least respect the good faith behind her decision. Instead, Mr. Reed grew irate, accusing Grace of repeatedly breaking policy. He declared that this library was not a charity shelter and that her lenience invited trouble. Grace tried to calm him down, explaining that Toby was a minor without a home, that books were a lifeline for him, and that they weren't losing any real revenue from a novel that would otherwise just sit on the shelf. But Mr. Reed was obstinate. Furious, he raised his voice so loudly that a few startled patrons turned toward them. Determined to enforce his version of order, he announced that Grace was dismissed from her position, effective immediately. For a moment, Grace was too stunned to respond. She had poured so much of herself into making the library a welcoming place. This was her livelihood, her calling, and she couldn't believe it could all be taken away for simply extending compassion. Toby, overhearing, tried to explain he'd bring the book right back or help in any way possible, but Mr. Reed silenced him. Feeling overwhelmed, Toby darted out of the library. The abruptness of it all left Grace reeling. She took a moment to gather her belongings and walked out the front doors, tears pricking her eyes. She questioned her own judgment, wondering if she had truly done something so wrong by letting a teen read for free. News in Oak Ridge traveled quickly. It started with a concerned teacher who had overheard parts of the argument and spilled the story to a friend at the grocery store. That friend related to the local diner owner who told a longtime patron who happened to be in the knitting club with the mayor's wife. By that afternoon, half the town had heard. Grace, the beloved librarian, had lost her job for helping a homeless teen access books. People gathered in small groups in the park, outraged and dismayed. Some had known Toby only vaguely as a boy who sometimes hovered outside the bakery window, longing for a warm pastry, but they felt compassion for him nonetheless. Others were longtime patrons who praised Grace for her outstanding service and her gentle nature. The story especially resonated with parents whose children had benefited from Grace's guidance, picking up reading habits that improved their school performance. Alarmed by the public's response, Mr. Reed tried to justify his decision. A few sympathetic folks from out of town might have agreed that rules were rules, but Oak Ridge's community mostly sided with Grace. Soon, the rumor mill reached Mayor Harding, who was known to step in whenever the town faced a moral dilemma. Concerned not only for the reputation of Oak Ridge, but for the ethical implications of the situation, He decided to investigate. Meanwhile, Grace was at home, feeling low and uncertain about her future. She couldn't see where to turn next. Money had never been abundant in her life, and losing her income felt terrifying. Yet she still believed she had done the right thing. That evening, Toby found the courage to appear on Grace's doorstep. He apologized, saying that his presence had caused her trouble, and offered to give the book back immediately. Grace, touched by his sincerity, told him that none of it was his fault. She was more determined than ever that Toby should keep reading, keep discovering stories that might buoy his spirits. The next morning, an unexpected knock sounded on Grace's door. She opened it to find Mayor Harding standing there, accompanied by 2 of the town council members. He offered a gentle smile and introduced himself, saying he'd come to hear her version of the events at the library. Nervous but resolute, Grace recounted everything that happened. She expressed her love for the library, her belief that the institution should serve everyone, including those who had nowhere else to go, and how Toby's predicament had awakened in her an even deeper sense of duty. The mayor listened attentively, nodding at her sincerity. Later that day, Mayor Harding walked to the library, where Mr. Reed was in the midst of making changes to staff schedules. The mayor insisted on speaking with him. Though it wasn't typical for the mayor to interfere in library personnel matters, this situation had garnered significant attention. Patrons, curious to see the result, lingered inside, pretending to peruse shelves. Mr. Reed maintained that the dismissal was a matter of library policy. The mayor countered that the library was still a public institution, funded in part by taxpayers, many of whom believed that compassion and accessibility were key values. Meanwhile, outside the library, small groups of residents had gathered, hoping their presence might encourage the powers that be to rectify the situation. Among them was Toby, standing quietly off to the side, hugging the fantasy book close. Eventually, the mayor emerged, announcing that while Mr. Reed had the authority to hire and fire within his domain, the council would be reviewing the library's mission statement and funding in light of these events. This statement alone made Mr. Reed blanch. He recognized that pushing too firmly against the collective outrage could damage not only the library's reputation but also his own standing in the community. It was too late, however, to simply restore Grace's position without looking inconsistent. Feeling the weight of the town's disapproval, Mr. Reed agreed to a talk, but only if Grace wished it. Yet Grace, having endured the humiliation of being fired, felt reluctant to return under the same management. She was torn between her love for the library and the knowledge that Mr. Reed would likely keep enforcing his strict policies. Days passed, and the library lost a number of regulars who refused to enter as long as Grace was gone. A hush fell over the normally bustling aisles, and volunteers began to quit. Some were teachers who disagreed with the message that the library was not a place for generosity. Others were local retirees who supported Grace's vision of a library's purpose. The library's board of trustees worried about the fallout, and Mr. Reed found himself in a precarious position. At the same time, the mayor decided to host a special town hall meeting to address the bigger question of how best to serve Oak Ridge's vulnerable populations. Word got around that a key topic would be the role of public institutions. People filled the old courthouse. Many stepped forward to defend Grace's actions, citing how her warmth and empathy had improved the lives of countless children and adults alike. Some recommended that a portion of the town's discretionary funds support a reading program for individuals who could not afford membership. The highlight of the evening came when Toby bravely stood up to speak. Though his voice trembled, he managed to articulate how Grace had made him feel human, seen, and cared for in a world that otherwise treated him as invisible. He said that what she had done allowed him to believe in a better tomorrow, and that refusing him access to books would only deepen his despair. The audience erupted into quiet applause and murmurs of admiration, moved by Toby's courage and the clarity of his words. After that meeting, the mayor contacted Grace with an offer. The town would grant her a small sum to help establish a reading lounge and informal community hub aimed at making books accessible to everyone, regardless of financial means. Grace was stunned by this possibility. She was just a librarian who had tried to help a single teenager. Yet the response from Oak Ridge was shaping a whole new project. one that might benefit not only Toby but countless others like him. Over the next month, Grace worked tirelessly. With help from local carpenters, donations of old furniture, and a small group of volunteers, she transformed a vacant storefront near Oak Ridge's main street into a cozy, light-filled reading lounge. The walls, freshly painted in warm tones, were lined with donated shelves. Townspeople brought in books. They no longer needed everything from classics to modern bestsellers and even children's picture books. A corner was reserved for reading cushions, where kids and teens could curl up with a good story, and a few chairs were placed near the windows to lure in passers-by with a glimpse of people immersed in books. Once it opened, the lounge quickly became a beloved community spot. High school students visited in the afternoons to study or talk about their favorite series. Elderly residents ambled in during their morning walks, grateful for a place to browse titles and share a chat with Grace, who remembered everyone's name and reading preferences. Some townspeople who rarely read began to stop by out of curiosity, drawn by the warmth of Grace's personality. Toby, with a new sense of belonging, volunteered daily, greeting visitors, tidying up, and curating a rotating display of fantasy novels and graphic novels. As for Mr. Reed, the library continued to lose visitors, as many residents flocked to Grace's lounge for its welcoming atmosphere. Facing budget cuts and pressure from both the trustees and the broader community, he realized that maybe strictness alone was not the best policy. Rumor had it he began reevaluating the library's approach, but by then, Oak Ridge had found a new reading haven in Grace's lounge. The funds that sustained Grace's project continued for several months, enough time for her to prove that kindness and accessibility could truly thrive. She attracted donations from local businesses, and soon she created a small membership that was voluntary. Those who could afford it helped, and those who couldn't still received the same services. In short, the lounge became a place where no one was turned away. By late spring, Grace's lounge was expanding into the adjacent storefront. She hired 2 assistants, giving them the freedom to develop special programs. One dedicated to teaching kids how to write their own short stories, and another offering life skills workshops like budgeting and healthy cooking. Toby, regaining confidence and stability, used the lounge's resources to pursue his high school equivalency diploma. He spent hours buried in study guides, supported by Grace and volunteers who tutored him. In this environment of hope, Toby's self-esteem blossomed. He spoke more freely, forging friendships he'd never imagined possible when he was sleeping on benches and feeling invisible. The entire town marveled at how, out of an initially painful situation, Grace's Faringa beautiful new opportunity arose. Oak Ridge had always been a tight-knit community, but the reading lounge brought people together in a way few could have foreseen. It became a symbol of what compassion, shared responsibility, and vision could accomplish. People who had never met discovered common interests in a novel, or learned from one another in the lounge's workshops. Every day, Grace reflected on how everything had unfolded. She had been deeply hurt and anxious after losing her library job, but the generosity and support of her neighbors made her realize that sometimes adversity lights the path to a greater purpose. She remained grateful for the chance to keep pursuing her passion, connecting people with the books they needed to read, whether for knowledge, comfort, or a fleeting sense of adventure. Whenever she heard the soft hum of visitors chatting, pages flipping, and subdued laughter filling the lounge, her heart lifted. If one were to ask Grace whether she wished her life had gone differently, she would say that she missed the old library building and the sense of tradition in its shelves. But she believed, more strongly than ever, that her real mission had always been to extend the magic of reading to whoever needed it. And now, in her own cozy nook on Main Street, people of all ages and backgrounds experienced the wonder of discovering new worlds without boundaries. What began as one small act of compassion, handing a homeless teen a free book, had transformed more than just Toby's life. It changed the entire community by proving that empathy, courage, and trust can triumph over rigid rules. Oak Ridge would forever remember the moment Grace gave Toby that novel, and how, in an unexpected twist, that single gesture sparked a wave of kindness, shining a light on the importance of giving, understanding, and the true power of stories.